Hi friends, today we are back with our last garden tour of the season. I can't believe that summer is basically over. We could have a frost any day now. It's the middle of September. Sometimes we've already had a frost by now, or so we're having a pretty nice fall, but it could be any day, which is so sad. I just so wish that our growing season was a little bit longer because there's just so many things in my garden that aren't quite ready. The tomatoes could use a few more weeks, the squash could use a few more weeks. Cold, slow spring, and a lot of stuff finally picked up in August. I've talked to a lot of local friends and a lot of people had the same experience where things just kind of took forever to get going, and when you have a short growing season to start with, that just sucks. But anyway, let's just walk around the garden and do one last little view of everything before it's all gone. Okay, we are still set up from my son's birthday party. So this was garlic. It's all been pulled out. We need to put this bed to bed for the winter. I took my grow bags apart and everything, so that's all done. My sunflowers, this is just the craziest sunflower year that we have ever had. Some of these are like 12 to 14 feet tall. They're just insane. They have so many of them have like 10 to 15 flowers per sunflower stalk, so they are just thriving. I don't know what it was about this year, but the sunflowers are just so beautiful. And then, like I said, a lot of this got off to a really slow start, so this was a lot of my root veggies. So there are beets and carrots in here, and these were planted in April, and they're like just I mean, I could pull them all right now, but I'm just kind of giving them time. I should have been able to pull these out forever ago. They were just so slow. There's some cabbages in here. These I put in here later in the summer, and I should have netted them, never did. So we'll see if we get any cabbages. Those I think are frost hardy too, so they are just gonna stay here for a while. And then this is all potatoes. These are ready to all be pulled out. As you can see, they're all dying back. So potatoes are ready to go. My peppers, we just live in such a cold climate. The peppers don't do great. I got a few peppers off of these, but pretty much not a whole lot. And I knew that going into it. This whole bed is tomatoes, and they did pretty good. Most of them are still green on the vine, and we're just gonna keep those until we have frost in the forecast. Then we'll pull them all out and they'll ripen in the house. I pretty much always end up doing that just because, like I said, we just don't have a long growing season and they just don't typically ripen on the vine. Some of them are pretty close. I've pulled lots of red ones off, but there's still tons of green tomatoes on the vines here. But I have noticed that my tomatoes this year are bigger than normal. I tend to get really little tomatoes, even if they are varieties that should be big. They just don't get super big here. But this year they are bigger. There's less tomatoes than normal, but they're bigger, which is nice and much easier for canning. And then this was a new spot for my zucchini. Usually I always kind of mix things up, but this is totally new that it's over here. And this was kind of hidden. There was potatoes in this bed. They were kind of blocking the zucchini. I knew I wouldn't be super disappointed if I didn't get a lot of zucchini, because it's usually easy to like find friends who are willing to share it. But it was really slow starting and it has just kind of gone wild. I think there's a bunch of zucchinis in here that are pretty close to being ready to being picked. I'm getting a lot that are like yellow. I think that that's just from like inconsistent watering. And then this is this view of this jungle. Tons and tons of green tomatoes on the vine over here still. And these tomatoes really loved this trellis system. So I'm gonna do this again. We just have a couple 2x2s as a frame. And then we just did some string, and I've just wound the tomatoes around this and they have climbed that, and that worked really well. And I much prefer this method over like doing tomato cages. So then over here is all these sunflowers again, and I have been cutting these for bouquets in the house. There's just so many. And then this was one thing that just didn't really take off. I have some squashes here. Again, if I had another month of summer, these would probably do great, but there was butternut squash and some patty pan squash, I think. I think there might be a few tiny little patty pans on here. You can see them. down here, the little yellow ones. I don't think there was any sign of butternut squash yet. They just needed more time, and I did not start these inside. So definitely in the future I need to start my squash in the house in like March. But these were really slow starting, and they're finally kind of picking up, and of course we just don't have enough time. But I was hoping that these would kind of trellis and grow all the way up with the sunflowers, and I think they would have. They just need more time. Actually, right here is what would be a tiny little butternut squash, but it would need several more weeks to continue growing. And this is full-on jungle back here. It hasn't really been trimmed in a while or anything, but this is raspberries that a friend gave me, so I planted a whole bunch of new raspberry stalks here, so next year hopefully we'll get more from that. And then I did pull tons of onions. There was like 100 onions planted in here, and those did pretty good. That was a lot of onions in a small amount of space, so was happy with those. And I do kind of stake or like support the sunflowers, otherwise they do this, but these ones are kind of wild. Okay, I have this huge raspberry bush. This is not a new one this year. This is one that was already here, and I'm actually noticing that it looks like there might be kind of a second harvest of raspberries coming up here. These did insanely well. These are like over 6 feet tall, and I got a ton of raspberries off of this bush this year, and that was the first year that this really like produced much. So excited for the other ones in the future. Down here I did like Swiss chard, lettuce, spinach and stuff. The Swiss chard actually looks great. I might pick some for the chickens. The spinach and lettuce is kind of gone now. It's just kind of like disappeared in here. And then we have lots of weeds over here. And just this huge mess of chamomile that's taking over the world over here. And then I have some calendula right here that's just starting to bloom. So hopefully these will continue to bloom and I can use these for something. There's lots of flowers on this. And then I had planted another crop of lettuce and spinach in here. There's some beans there that never really did much. Actually, look at this. There's a couple huge beans that I missed. That's interesting. They have climbed right up those sunflowers. So, but yeah, that is pretty much the September jungle update. Not my best garden year, not the worst. Just kind of really slow, and that's what happens. So we will be harvesting everything in the next couple weeks, getting everything pulled out before we get snow, which really could be any day. And then just making sure to cover these beds before winter so that they're nicely insulated and everything. And I think in my last garden update, my herbs were really, really sad. So a lot of them came back. A lot of them are still really sad. But my mint actually looks really awesome. And the basil kind of came back a little bit, but it's still looking sad again. This yarrow actually really needs to be planted in the ground, but I have a rosemary that's looking pretty good, another basil, and some flowers that look really thirsty.